Imagine hiking alone, miles from the nearest road. The trail disappears, the woods fall silent, and the only sound you hear is your own footsteps. But then, those footsteps keep going, even after you've stopped moving. In 2019, a solo backpacker in Oregon's Mount Hood wilderness thought he had the forest to himself. Instead, he discovered something inside the trees that was watching him. This is the story of the Hollow Trail. The first mistake was leaving the marked trail. Daniel, 27, was an experienced backpacker. He had gear, food, maps, everything he needed. But on his second day, he noticed a dotted line on his map, an old route no longer maintained. It promised a faster way back, and he couldn't resist. The forest grew darker almost immediately. Towering firs blocked out the sky, their trunks blackened by fire decades ago. Some were hollow, with openings so wide you could step inside. They looked like natural scars, nothing more. But the silence was unnatural. Then came the footsteps. At first, Daniel thought it was just the echo of his own boots on the ground. But when he stopped, they didn't. When he turned, there was no one there. By dusk, the silence pressed in like a weight. No birds, no insects, not even wind. He set up camp beside one of the hollow trunks, hoping morning would bring him comfort. What woke him wasn't a sound outside the tent, but inside the tree. Breathing, slow, heavy, too steady to be an animal. Daniel lay frozen, staring at the thin wall of fabric between him and the hollow trunk. After minutes that felt like hours, he unzipped the tent halfway and aimed his flashlight into the cavity. The beam didn't find the back. It was as if the inside went deeper than the tree itself. The moment the light entered, the breathing stopped. He didn't sleep again that night. But when the sun finally rose, something chilled him more than the breathing. His pack was open. Items that had been sealed inside were spread neatly on the dirt. His food bag was ripped apart but untouched. And his flashlight, the one he'd left zipped in his pack, was standing upright in the soil, aimed directly at his tent. That was enough. He decided to cut the trip short and leave. The forest didn't make it easy. As he hiked, the sensation of being shadowed grew stronger. Branches snapped just off the trail. He caught glimpses of movement between trees, always in the corner of his vision, never clear when he turned. Then, passing another hollow trunk, he froze. Carved faintly into the bark were his own initials. He had never been there before. By the time the forest finally gave way to open trail, Daniel was exhausted and shaken. He drove home, convinced the worst was behind him. But that night, scrolling through the photos on his phone, he found one he didn't remember taking. It showed him, inside his tent, asleep. The photo wasn't taken from the ground or from his gear. The angle was from inside the hollow tree, pointing out at him. Daniel never went back to Mount Hood, and to this day, he swears something stepped out of the trees that night, close enough to watch him sleep, and close enough to hold his phone. It began on a cold November evening. Two lifelong friends, both hunters, set out into the Appalachian backcountry. They were experienced, knew the ridges and hollows by heart, and had tracked game through these woods for years without incident. But that night, as the sun dipped below the trees and the woods grew dark, they noticed something unusual. Off in the distance, between the trees, glowed the faint flicker of lantern light. At first, it was comforting. Proof that they weren't alone in the deep woods. But within minutes, something about the glow unsettled them. Lanterns carried by hand have a rhythm, swaying with footsteps, bobbing with each stride. But these lights moved differently. They drifted in smooth arcs, gliding side to side, weaving between the trees as if they were floating. The hunters called out, expecting voices to answer. Nothing came back. Still, curiosity tugged at them. They followed. The deeper they went, the stranger the forest felt. The normal night sounds, the rustle of leaves, the chirp of crickets, had faded. All that remained was the crunch of their own boots and the faint, drifting lights pulling them further into the ridge. They followed for nearly half an hour, the woods growing darker, the path less familiar. Just when they thought the glow was slipping out of reach for good, the lights stopped. The hunters stepped into a clearing and froze. All around them, hanging from the branches, were figures. Crude shapes made of branches lashed together with twine. Stick men, dozens of them, swaying lightly in the cold air. At first, the hunters thought it was some hunter's prank, or a ritual marker left behind years ago. But when they stepped closer, the details became clear. Each figure had human teeth hammered into the wood. Some were old, cracked, and yellow. Others looked disturbingly fresh, white enamel catching the faint lantern glow. The jaws weren't just random. They were arranged. Patterns of grins, rows of biting smiles. The hunters backed away, their breath fogging in the air. Above them, the lanterns no longer moved as though drifting. They hung still now, suspended over the effigies, swaying ever so slightly as if waiting. Neither man spoke. The silence was heavier than the night air, and both felt the same primal warning pressed down on them. Leave now or stay forever. They turned and began walking, not running, though every instinct screamed at them to. Running in the woods at night is a death sentence, and they knew whatever was behind them would follow if they showed fear, so they walked, steady and fast, until the clearing vanished from view. For the next mile, they didn't speak. They didn't even breathe deeply. Only when the forest finally opened and they saw the dim outline of the road did they dare to believe they were safe. The lights were gone. The silence broke. And only then did they let themselves run the final stretch back to their truck. Later, when they told their story in town, most people laughed it off. Said they'd been drinking or mistaken fireflies for lanterns. But one old man didn't laugh. He listened, face pale, and when they finished, he gave them a warning. "You don't follow lights in those woods," he told them. "They're not people. They're not meant to be followed. If you chase them long enough, they'll lead you to hang with the rest." The hunters never went back to that ridge, and when asked why, they don't talk about the deer they never found. They talk about the lanterns, the teeth hammered into the trees, and the feeling that the forest itself had been trying to claim them. It was late summer in the Colorado backcountry when a group of friends stumbled on a campsite deep in the forest. At first, it looked like the kind of setup any hikers might leave behind for the night. 2 tents pitched neatly, sleeping bags unrolled inside, a small fire pit still smoldering, and a cooler, half open, with food inside. But there was one problem. No one was there. The friends called out, expecting voices to answer from the trees. Nothing. They checked the ground for tracks, looked for signs of a struggle. There weren't any. Everything looked like the campers had just stepped away for a moment and never returned. Uneasy but not wanting to get involved, the group set up their own camp a short distance away, close enough to keep an eye on the abandoned site. That night, the woods grew unnaturally still. No crickets, no owls, just the occasional crack of branches in the dark. The friends sat around their fire, trying to ignore the feeling that something was watching them. Then the voices started. At first, they thought it was one of their own calling from the tree line. But the sound was wrong, too flat, too perfect. The voices weren't just random, they were exact copies of the people sitting at the fire. One voice called a friend's name in the exact same tone he used earlier that day. Another voice laughed, the same short laugh one of them had made at a joke an hour ago. The voices circled the camp, never showing themselves, always just far enough into the dark to stay hidden. One of the friends started to unzip his tent, ready to investigate. Then he froze. The voice calling his name wasn't coming from the woods. It was coming from the direction where his best friend was already sleeping inside a tent. None of them slept after that. When the sun finally came up, they worked up the courage to check the abandoned site again, but what they found left them more unsettled than the voices. The campsite was gone. No tents, no sleeping bags, no cooler. The smoldering fire pit had vanished too, leaving only bare earth. It was as if it had never been there at all. Shaken, the group packed their gear and left that morning, cutting the trip short. They never reported what they heard, worried no one would believe them. But each of them swears to this day that the voices weren't just tricks of the forest. They believe the abandoned campsite had been bait, a lure to draw them closer, just like it had drawn in whoever was there before them. And whatever had called their names in the dark is still out there, waiting for the next group to answer. The forest keeps its secrets, but sometimes it leaves just enough behind to make sure we never forget. If you enjoy stories like these, make sure to like the video and subscribe. I bring new horror stories every week, and there are plenty more waiting in the dark.